upon my exposure to Edward Obaidey sensei and Ikuta sensei, I discovered that there was another methodology and another way to needle. I was very suspicious at first, having trained and practiced in deeper needling and strong needling techniques. It took a lot of convincing, but I felt there was something, and I made a decision to just do light needling. And for 3 years, I did only very, very light needling. Subsequent to that, I've gradually introduced some of the other methodologies, but my primary aim in clinic is to ensure that I get, obviously, the most positive clinical outcomes that I can, but to do it in such a manner that the patient is relaxed and comfortable through the entire process. And what I found as a result of that, the patients are much more likely to come back in, and they won't necessarily only come back in when they're in gross pain, discomfort, or unwell. In many instances, they come in to promote their health because they know they're going to have a very relaxing, enjoyable experience.
For that, Alan, could you talk a little bit more about the context of the painless needle technique and where that comes from?
There's a mistaken perspective that Japanese acupuncture, all it is painless needling and needling the meridians. That's not particularly accurate. There are many styles of Japanese acupuncture, as there are many styles of acupuncture worldwide. But the actual philosophy behind the needling is actually traditionally Chinese. And that's the irony of it, that the classics that were written by the ancient Chinese practitioner in China are the foundations upon which the needling skills of traditional Japanese acupuncture are built. Primarily, chapter 3 of the Ling-Shu, chapter 67 of the Ling-Shu. This is not a concoction. This is traditional Chinese medicine. This is classical. Crude physicians have a mechanical needling technique, but excellent doctors know the condition of the qi and blood during disease. Tonification and dispersion needling is subtle and delicate. Let's say that one more time. Tonification and dispersion needling is subtle and delicate. Chapter 67, when needling, we always ensure there is a kind of response. We can use the pulse to verify the response. We can also use the tension around the point and the warmth and the coolness around the point in regards the response to the needling. It is the art of acupuncture. My experience, and I've experienced both the TCM and, if you like, the traditional Japanese, but as you're now finding out, it's actually traditional Chinese acupuncture, is this. For 13 years, I got okay results, but I didn't have a lot of patients coming back for maintaining health. Subsequent to my working with and the mentoring from Ikuta sensei, I find I get a lot more patients coming in for preventative medicine and a lot more people commenting on how relaxed and how rejuvenated they feel after the treatments. It is so important from my perspective now, from the experience of the last 24 years, that we are able to needle painlessly. And I mean painlessly. If we're, for instance, if we're needling the wood points on the yin meridians, or we're needling the fire points on the yin meridians. So let's, for instance, look at the pericardium and spleen meridian. pericardium 1 or pericardium 2, there is a real art form to actually needling these points painlessly, and it can be done. This is when we talk about using these points in the root treatment, we're talking about a painless technique. This is especially during the root treatment, not so much in the other parts of the treatment, but the root treatment, as I mentioned last week, is a very, very potent and powerful primer to treating locally and using the back shu or the front mu points. It sets, from my experience, it sets me up for success in the treatment. And if I don't get a positive outcome, I actually have a reference to go back, reconsider, recalibrate, and go to another direction, which I find really satisfying because I'm able to learn from my mistakes. But back to the point, painless needling of, say, spleen 1, pericardium 2, or pericardium 9, and pericardium 8 is a real art form to elicit the maximum response, the maximum positive clinical outcome from my experience is to be able to needle these points painlessly. This is not necessarily the case if we're looking to needle gallbladder 30 when a patient has sciatica, or bladder 54. This is not necessarily the case when we're using Pitocin or putting Moxa on the top of the needles. We're talking about the root treatment. This is the power plant. No question in my mind at all, 100%. This is where the action takes. Everything else complements the root treatment. The root treatment is the power and the passion of acupuncture practice, traditional acupuncture practice. It is this part of the treatment that's spoken of in the classics.
Thank you so much for giving that example. I think it helps break it down, because the root treatment is very content rich as far as all of the context that goes into it. So just to quickly touch on from our previous seminar and then a webinar and then the next one, just to frame the next question. So we previously discussed the 69th chapter of the Nanjing and how 5-element theory can be a philosophical basis for both diagnosing and also point selection for the root treatment. And then I believe next week we're going to be covering more what you just touched on in, I think it was the Ling-Shu chapter 3, about the tonification and dispersion. So I think that those needling techniques we're covering next in the next webinar. But for today, could you talk a little bit about the mechanics in respect to the logistics of applying the root treatment and that subtlety that you were talking about, like assessing the effectiveness of that treatment? How long does the root treatment go for? Just a logistical step-by-step for people who perhaps aren't practicing using those techniques yet.
Okay, so to study the chapter 3, chapter 67 of the Ling-Shu and innumerable other chapters, chapter 1 as well, and there's a number of chapters in the Nanjing that refer to the needling techniques. But initially, what we're looking at the body is actually humans. We are actually a living, breathing entity. We're not just a bag of bones and flesh. So just bunging and whacking an acupuncture needle in, it's effective to some degree, of course. But if we want to elicit the maximum response, then we need, as well, my experience is that I need to approach the patient with the greatest amount of sensitivity and acknowledge that the energetics of the patient actually exist beyond the flesh. That there is what we call the Wei Qi, or defensive Qi, and it's not, it radiates out to some degree. So when we're going in to apply the root treatment, the primary intention is to create a hole, or move the Wei Qi aside. So from that perspective, using our left hand, we're locating the point, and then we're actually massaging the surface of the skin and gently moving the energy aside. That means that when we go to insert the needle, especially in the root treatment, we are able to move through the Wei Qi level or the defensive Qi level painlessly. Now, if you could imagine, if we're going to be working on a point like spleen 2 or spleen 1, and they're very, very powerful points, then what we really have to work to move and displace the Wei Qi to be able to effectively needle that point painlessly. To do that, if we have a very opposite effect. If we cause pain, we're actually dispersing the point. So initially, we're moving the Qi apart. Then when we insert the needle, and we're doing that with dexterity, and it takes practice. Everything in traditional acupuncture, in my experience, takes practice. We are actually create what's called oshidi, which is a way of actually a conduit between the practitioner to the needle to the patient. So what we're actually looking at, or what I'm talking about, is like an energetic perspective. So that as we breathe and we're living, we actually are a ball of energy. We are a living entity, energetic entity. When we're performing the root treatment, as it is espoused in the traditional Chinese classical text, we are acting as a conduit for our energy, our qi. We are focused on our breathing. We are focused on the patient's breathing. We are focused on the movement of energy, especially in the lung and the large intestine meridian, because we're using the thumb and the forefinger in the oshidi. So this is the contact between the patient, the practitioner, and the needle. Then the needle contacts the patient. So the more persuasive we are, my understanding, in the root treatment, then the more reactive the patient is, the more response we get, because energetically they're relaxed. And the more relaxed, my understanding, again, the patient is during the course of the treatment, then the more responsive they are as a result of the qi and the blood moving freely around the body. So we've now got contact. We've prepared the point. We are now communicating energetically with the patient via the lung and large intestine meridian, which are thumb and forefinger contacting the needle whilst we're applying the root treatment. And then we're breathing, and we are, or I am, when I do this, I am at the needle point. My focus is the needle point. It becomes I see it, I feel it, I taste it. This is where our focus needs to be. The needle point, and then during the course of treatment, to strengthen, if we choose to, we can actually have a mental image of the pathway of the meridian. For instance, if we're tonifying the kidney meridian, and as a result of that, the kidney organ, we can have the clearer our perspective is and our understanding of and our visualization of the meridian pathway, my understanding and my experience is, the more potent the root treatment is. The root treatment, it depends. I've seen Nikita Sensei do root treatments. Basically, we'll just talk about treating the yin meridians at the moment. We're not going to worry about the yang meridians this week, but we'll talk about the yin meridians. I've seen Nikita Sensei perform root treatments in under 30 seconds. But his ability to focus and his intention is refined by over 50 years of clinical practice. For mine, I go by a sense, but I think if you wanted to use parameters, there are some breath parameters where you breathe a certain number of breaths for a particular meridian in the patient. However, for mine, I go more by intuitive, by feeling. That can last, holding a particular point, let's just say spleen 2, or 30 seconds tops for that particular point. So let's just say, for instance, maybe not even 30 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds pericardium A, 20 to 30 seconds on pericardium 2. The reason being is that these are the 5 points. They're really sensitive. They're so near the extremities that the amount of stimulation required to activate these points is less than if we're using the Hossi points or the water points of the meridian. So there we need a little bit deeper, and we tend to stay a little longer because of the quality or the nature of the point. And the further we get, or the closer we get to the extremity of the body, the less stimulation we need to apply to get a reaction. And this is a real key to over-treating is as deleterious to the positive outcome as under-treating. And that is my experience, certainly in clinic. Have I answered the question, Naomi?
Yes, I think that you have. So
excuse me one moment. I'd really like to see everyone. So if you want, you're welcome to put your cameras on, but please keep your sound off. I get a great deal of enjoyment, and I feel a lot more connected to everyone when I can see your faces. And thank you. It's great to have you on board. Cheers, Naomi. Please go ahead.
So just to sort of summarize what we've sort of covered. So you're talking that in the root treatment, which is happening at the beginning of the treatment,
yep,
you're diagnosing the underlying imbalance, often according to the 5-element theory from the 69th chapter of the Nanjing. And in that, you are then applying a root treatment to correct your diagnosis by affecting the meridian and organ system in real time during your root treatment. Correct. By using the point dynamics.
Absolutely. The dynamics, the root treatment is a spontaneous response. I'm a bit embarrassed to tell this story, but I will anyway. When the second time I visited Ikuda Sensei's clinic, or actually the first time I visited, the first thing he did was got me to come in and take the pulse of a patient that he was treating. And I will admit, at that stage of the game, my knowledge of pulse was limited to what we used to get a Xerox. I don't know whether anyone's old enough to remember what a Xerox of, but it's like a photocopy, but it's way before photocopies were invented, of the different qualities of the pulse. And that was it. It was a 1-2 hour lesson, and that was the finish of the pulse in my education. Ikuda Sensei got me to take the pulse, and it's a huge landmark in everyone else can hear me? I've got someone saying I can't hear. All good? Okay, Samuel, I don't know what's going on there, mate, but everything's good. So Ikuda Sensei got me to take the pulse of a patient that he was treating. And it was a landmark. It was a light bulb going off, because as he treated, I felt the pulse change. Up until then, I thought, oh, you need to do an acupuncture treatment. The patient feels a bit better a day or two later, and that's the way it all works, you know. Had no idea, clueless, absolutely clueless. And then not long after that, he got me up on the table and he gave me a treatment. And I had never felt anything like that before. He tonified kidney 7 and lung 8, but when he tonified kidney 7, I felt the chi, I felt the warmth. It was like not a rush of blood, but a flow, a really warm flow of blood up the inner part of my legs. And I was like, that was my first visit to Ikuda Sensei's clinic in January 1996. And I knew right then and there that, hey, hang on, this is what I've been looking for more than a decade. And I've discovered it. So in a nutshell, it is my understanding and experience with the application of refined needling with skill and utilizing the root treatment that we can elicit a spontaneous response. There should be an immediate change in the pulse. If there's not, then we're not going to worry. We're going to continue to practice until we start to feel the difference in the pulse. And when I say this is all a bit challenging, because it's, for many people, it's very new. and it was very new for me too. And as I say, for 3 years, I just went to needling lightly. And I'm not saying anyone has to do that. What I'm urging is everyone give this a try, because unless you do experiment with this, then the potential for evolving to a more advanced level of practice, according to the traditional Chinese classics, is so limited. And we don't elicit the true value, the true power of this medicine. This medicine rocks. And that's why I'm doing this. It's not because I'm going to make a lot of money, and it's not because I think everything else is wrong. It's because I know that when we apply this medicine using the classical principles, understanding that the patient will respond spontaneously when we have the correct root treatment or in the incorrect one, it really enlivens the treatment, and we become a part of the art of acupuncture. We join a 3,000-year lineage, and that creates an enormous amount of power in our treatments. When we are aligned with this lineage, we have got a gift. And Ikeda Sensei has made it available to us by understanding and translating the classics into a clinically relevant manner. And then Takashi Furei and his amazing translation team have put that into English text. So generationally, we're incredibly fortunate. When I first started the practice of traditional Japanese, traditional acupuncture, we had nothing. Zero. We had a tiny little book from the first workshop that was 8 pages long and had maybe 200 words in it. So we have an abundance of literature, and we have a magical video from Ikeda Sensei's workshop here in Australia in 2018, his last international workshop overseas. So yeah, Naomi, if I missed anything there, please.
Thank you. I think you've covered the questions that I had around, especially the painless application of needling during the root treatment. I was thinking we've probably got to a time where if you want to open it up to any questions that people have got relevant to what we've been talking about. Yeah. Are you ready for questions? Or
I'm just seeing lots of beautiful faces, people I know and people I don't. Lovely. Okay.
So if anyone's got any questions, if you want to type them into the chat, and then Alan we'll have a few minutes for him to address.
Waiting. So should I just click the chat box? The chat box?
Yeah, if you click the chat box, if anyone is writing in questions, it'll come up.
Claudio.
Alan, okay. Sorry, I was going to read them for you, Alan, but you can do it now.
Please do that, Maria.
Okay, so Claudio is asking, would like to know when to use the Lua points.
I'm very happy to answer the question, Claudio, and thank you for asking. Just a little bit out of context for this particular webinar, but I'm more than happy. My understanding of using the low points is primarily when we have a condition where both the yin and the yang meridians, the connected yin and yang, so it would be the large intestine lung, or the lung and the large intestine, the kidney and bladder, the liver, the gallbladder, etc., etc. When there's a congruent deficiency in both of those meridians, then the low points are particularly effective when we want to tonify or strengthen the circulation of qi in those particular meridians. So if we wanted to strengthen the flow of qi in both the lung and the large intestine meridian, we would use lung 7. If we wanted to strengthen the flow of qi in the liver and gallbladder meridians, we would use liver 5, etc., etc. So that's my understanding. And just to take us a little bit advanced, is when we're treating conditions when there's both deficiency of the qi and blood simultaneously, the low points can be incredibly effective in giving a spontaneous boost to the circulation of qi, and as a result of that, blood in the associated meridians. All good. I think, is that okay, Claudio?
Alan? Oh.
Yes?
He says thanks.
Okay.
I have here another question from Max Visca, and he's asking if you could tell us more about the art of needling pericardium 8.
Great question, Max. And it is an art. It really is an art. Should I demonstrate now? Just, do you think, or should we leave that till next week, the demonstration? Naomi?
I think
Maria?
next week, because the whole webinar will be on the practical application.
Okay. Yeah. It's okay. To describe it, an analogy will come in a moment. It's needling pericardium 8. It's a bit like putting our finger on the surface of a bowl of water and veritably not creating a wake. So there is an art to it. Next week, I'm more than happy to demonstrate actually how to go about that. But it's a little bit like we're dancing on the surface. It's like you would see a butterfly just resting on the leaf. So there is contact, but the contact is that. It's contact. It's not necessarily inserting the needle into any great depth. So it's just a dance where we land on the point, and then we take off again, closing the point afterwards. So Max, thank you for the question. Good one. We'll dig into the practical application of that next week.
Okay, Lucas is here with a question. I'm going to read. Some authors claim that Luo branches from Luo to opposite Yuan meridian, where other authors claim that run from Luo point to Luo point. What is your opinion?
My opinion, the opinion of the classics, Lo to Yuan. The low point to the Yuan point. That's my opinion.
There is here another question from Purian Salinia. Hi, Alan. How long did you say you needle the point in root treatment? On your videos, it seemed to be up to 15 seconds, and for shunting, it is much shorter.
Yeah, my internet connection's a little bit wobbly this morning, so excuse me, I just dropped out there for a moment. It does vary. As I was saying before, needling the water points, I tend to spend a bit more time. I guess I never put the clock on it, so it's hard to know, because now I feel for it rather than think for it. But the rule of thumb would be 30 seconds on each of the points. So all up, doing performing the root treatment on the yin meridians, yeah, you'd be really well cut at 2 minutes that's big. That's a long time. Having said that, it varies, you know, it depends on how we are energetically, how we're feeling, the level of, you know, like our energetic movement outwards. It depends on how the patient's feeling, how depleted they are. And the irony of it is that the more depleted the patient is of qi and blood, then the less stimulation we really should use. Because if we look at it from the perspective that we are asking the patient to respond to an external stimulus, if the patient energetically really low and we make too strong a demand, then rather than charging their battery, we'll actually flatten their battery. And this happened to me. I had a classic example. I treated an elderly patient in Tasmania, oh God, 30 years ago, way before I knew anything about practice of traditional acupuncture. I just practiced TCM. And she had terrible sciatica. She was 80 plus years of age. She was such a beautiful woman. Oh my God. And I just felt for her so much. So I felt for her so much that I put in 60 needles. I thought, I'm going to fix this lady right up. Yeah. So I used just the shorter needles and I fixed her up all right. I put in 60 needles. It was a lesson I'll never forget. And it caused me a lot of heartache and a lot of pain. I made her condition so much worse, diabolically worse. And to the best of my knowledge, she never improved from that situation. And it was a terrible experience. I have a couple of those where I learned from making the mistake of over-treating. So it's a variation. For some people, the root treatment can last a minute and a half, 2 minutes. For a lot of people, it's all done over and done within a minute to a minute and a half. That's a real average. It takes practice. It takes learning. Learning takes making mistakes as well as having positive outcomes. And the biggest, as I said last week, one of the major learning curves for me with Ikeda Sensei was he implored me not to be too hard on myself for the mistakes, but to be honest with myself that I had made a mistake and to learn from the mistake. That was the most important lesson for me.
Thank you, Alan. I have here a question that I'm not sure about the meaning of the question, but I will read it to you.
Yes,
Is Rand Youssef is a TCM acupuncturist from London, and he is very successful in his treatments, but he has heard that a good acupuncturist should make a sparkle in the needle point. Is that true, and is it necessary? Thanks in advance. And then I just ask if you could be more specific. And then he said, one of the patients told me that he had an acu session 20 years ago, and the patient was feeling a sparkle in the point every time the practitioner put a needle. So I was thinking maybe he's opening the energy stagnation, and I was wondering if it's necessary. Yeah.
That is really relevant to how we would define a sparkle. That sparkle could be a number of different things, but the first thing that comes to mind to me is the fact that we haven't actually moved the Wei-Qi aside before we treat. So that can be the pin pricking sensation as we put the needle in. That's not a sparkle that I aspire to creating. The sparkle that I would be looking at, or the one that I'm looking to reproduce in clinic, is more like it's an ooze rather than a sparkle. It's a flow. If I want to move the energy, yeah. But if I'm looking to tonify and strengthen, and I'm moving the qi from out externally through me, through my arms, through my fingers, to the needle tip, to the patient's point, and then meridian, and then their organ, I'm looking for flow. That's the feeling, that's the sensation, and it invariably will be a flow, a warm flow, like like the sensation if we were to walk into a room and we had a group of friends there, and they all smiled, and you knew they were really happy to see you. It's like I feel now. I feel a lot of warmth from seeing all the different faces of everyone here today. That gives me a warmth. That is the energy we're talking about. It's not bang, whack, woo. It's so, and I hope that is a adequate response to the question. But it all sparkle. Yeah, more a flow.
Thank you, Alan. I think we just have here one last question before we finish. This is Andrew Rodriguez. He's asking, for this subtle type of needling, do you use Teishin also?
Absolutely. Actually, it's a fallback strategy. If our needle technique, Teishin, one moment, I'll just, I'll get mine out so people know what we're talking about. This is a Teishin. This is an instrument we use primarily in pediatric acupuncture. So you'll see that the tip is blunt. This is a silver Teishin given to us by Ikeda Sensei some years ago. We use this in the treatment of children. I could talk wax on lyrical about pediatric treatment, but if we use the idea or the understanding that the children are small in mass and high in energy, then the amount of stimulation required to elicit a response from them is less than it would be an aged adult, per se. But for the purpose of treating the wood points, and to a lesser degree the fire points, but certainly the wood points, the Teishin can be very, very effective. My first choice is always the needling, but the Teishin is a great fallback, and this are available from people that supply Japanese acupuncture goods. Sorry, I'm trying to get it in the camera there. That's a silver one. They're a little bit expensive, but there are stainless steel and copper ones. Again, it's a matter of making sure the Teishin is nice and warm. This is about warmth. Our Yankee, we're moving warmth through to the patient. This is the fundamental underlying principle of tonifying the yin meridians. We're introducing yang energy in a consumable, a digestible form for the patient, for each patient, and that can differ. It's a different story treating a rugby player who's really thick and strong and they're like, well, what are you doing? Are you doing anything? To treating a woman who's just had a child and is breastfeeding. A whole different ballgame, totally different energetic approach to acupuncture.
Thank you, Alan. I think there is still some more questions coming. I'm not sure if you feel like you still want to answer some
more questions, and then I'll need to have breakfast.
Okay, so I think this one is a simple one. So how does Teishin differ from needling in application? From Jen.
Well, Teishin is it's contact needling. It differs from the fact that it's not penetrating the surface. So it's primarily tonifying the yang ki, the most yang of the ki, the wei ki. Hence why it's more effective for use on points closer to the extremity, because the yang energy is a lot more volatile at the extremities of the body. I'm not saying it's not effective, say, on the water points. It's certainly with children it is, but with the adults, energetically, the meridians are a little deeper under the surface. There's not as much yang ki, energy v mass, yin energy. The ratio is far different from children. So you could say that the Teishin is very good at moving the wei ki or the yang ki at a superficial level, particularly the wood. When we're doing the surface or contact needling on the neck and shoulders, or when we're just working generally with the meridian itself, moving up and down the meridian pathways.
Thank you, Alan. I think we finished all the questions for today. If you want to say something before I just conclude the session.
We're just dropping a little.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. I can, a little bit in and out. Just one moment. Just try again.
Can you hear me now?
It's pretty broken. I can hear you, yes.
Okay, so I think I would leave the questions for the next webinar. So if you do you wanna conclude the session, Alan, or do you wanna answer more questions? It's up to you. Yeah, very uplifting experience for me this week. I'd like to
I really appreciate the support of Maria and Naomi in taking a lot of the stress out of this for me. I'm much better at when I'm being asked the questions and I have facial contact with people. I feel a lot better. I feel very connected. I'm very grateful and very humble that so many people would consider what I've got to say worth listening to. It is based on 37 years of clinical experience, and it is based, and the inspiration is my passion for treatment outcomes for my patients, and a commitment I made to Ikeda Sensei in 2002 to do everything I could to ensure that our lineage stayed congruent, that we remained connected to our lineage, and that we continue to evolve with respect to our lineage, and to actually give people the opportunity to move forward in their practice of acupuncture and produce superior clinical outcomes as a result of connecting with the lineage, which is more than me. It's more than Ikeda Sensei. Sensei or Manaka Sensei, any of the great Chinese senseis, we are part of a lineage. And when we practice this medicine respectfully, in a respectful manner towards the lineage, my understanding, certainly my experience, our treatment outcomes expand exponentially. And it's that passion that drives me. And I really appreciate your presence. We'll be back next week. Got some real good stuff available on worldacupuncture.com. You're welcome to drop in there whenever. But primarily, thank you very much for attending. Lovely to see all your smiling faces, and in some cases, sleepy faces, and in some cases, grimacing faces. Take care. Look after yourselves. I'm available. Maria will tell you how to contact me if you have any specific questions you'd like to elaborate on in the meantime. But if not, same time, same place next week. Take care. Much love from Rainbow Bay, Australia. Ciao.
Hi, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Naomi. I just would like to say to everyone that the link with the recording of the webinar will be sent to everyone. And I just would like to share the resources you can get through worldacupuncture.com. So you have books in the shop. Some of the books of Masakazu Ikeda Sensei have been translated into English. Also, you have a 3-day video seminar that happened in 2018 in Australia that has 16 CPD points. So you can also have access to that through the shop in the website. And then the whole website is an online learning platform for traditional Japanese acupuncture. It has around 15 years of age. It has more than 200 videos with a lot of resources, which I just here give an example on diagnosis, symptom patterns, and skills. But you can also just go there and you have free videos that you can watch, and you can have an idea what you can get inside the website. So that would be with a monthly subscription that you can have access to everything. And you can also have tutoring directly with Alan Jansson Sensei, and he can work directly with you through on like Zoom sessions, and you can ask all the questions that you need. So we will be sending you by email also the link for the next webinar. Thank you for coming. Nice to see you, everyone. Mm-hmm.